G'day guys, it's Sunday morning and it's just gone 7 o'clock and I'm down here in the shed looking at my new second-hand Detroit engine. So I'll just flip you around. So I picked this up Wednesday from Perth and Brent Stockwell, my freight forwarder, got it across from Victoria for me, and I just went and picked it up to the guys that brought it over, from the guys that brought it over on Wednesday morning, and I was back by lunchtime. And when we put it on the truck, it was all just wrapped up in shrink wrap, and I knew nothing more about it other than the fact that it's just a good running 14 litre motor. But as soon as I'm unwrapping it, I'm starting to see all sorts of goodies. So it's got the Performance Aftermarket exhaust manifold on it, which is a fairly common upgrade for these, and it was on my shopping list, but they're fairly pricey, so it just hadn't happened. Near new turbo on it, like this is a recent thing that's been put onto it. It's the K31 Borg Warner, which, same thing, it's a performance upgrade for these engines, and also was on my shopping list. So that was sort of just a little bonus thing, almost like a gift from God. So I'm feeling quite blessed with that. But walking around the engine, and I've taken a lot of stuff off it to get it ready to paint because it was a bit scruffy. And you can see where I've been sanding away on it last night. There was a lot of flaked paint and things like that. But it had also, this is the fan clutch to drive the engine fan. That's near new. And it's very recently had the cylinder head off it. I'll just see if you guys can get a look. But have a look in there where the gasket surfaces have been cleaned up. And they haven't even had time to go rusty. And if you sort of squint along underneath it, there's spots where you can see the new head gasket in there. And you can see where the timing cover's been apart in places. So they've definitely done something to it. So I'm guessing maybe a top overhaul. So feeling pretty happy about that. And the other thing I'm hoping for is it could have an aftermarket program in the computer. So the engine computer is this little greasy box down here. There was a bit of an oil leak on the compressor, so I'm just going to put my old compressor on it rather than worry about that. But it's pretty common to put a bit of a program in these for extra horsepower. Now, this combination of engine comes 500 horsepower as the baseline, up to 575 on factory settings. Now, if you put a performance program in there, well, you can bump them up to 600 with the manifold and the turbo. So quietly confident that we could have a little bit north of 600 horsepower, so that'll be exciting. And so really looking forward to getting it in and getting it going. But I want to show you something else too. Now, one of the new things on it, and I've put it over in the back of the ute, I'll just bear with me a minute, I'm looking for something very special. It was down here last night. You think a bloke would actually have himself lined up with the things he wants to talk about before he gets into this sort of stuff. Now, here's a bolt that does not belong to this engine. And because I was going to paint it, I started pulling things off it. But first of all, I'll get back to the new sensor harness. So there's a wiring harness runs from the ECM and runs to all the sensors on the engine. So there's a couple of sensors there. And there's I think that'll be a crank angle sensor down there. There's another one hiding up in there for a cam angle sensor. And so anyway, I'm pulling the ECM off and this bolt drops out behind it. And in the side of the block, there's this little groove worn into it where this bolt has been sitting for years. And the back of the ECM cover, there's also a groove worn in it where it's been sitting for years. Now, ECMs on these engines need to be insulated from the block. So if they short out in any way, it will throw all sorts of weird codes on the dash, and every so often it'll just shut the motor down for no good reason. How do I know this? It's happened to me. I've had a little piece of blue metal dropped in behind the ECM on my existing motor, and same thing, it'll throw fuel codes, it'll throw coolant codes, it'll shut it down for low coolant level and all sorts of weird stuff. And having had experienced it in the past, as soon as that fell out, I thought, that's why it's got a new sensor harness on it. They've been trying to find the problem with this engine for a long time, and just by sheer fluke, I found it just because I was going to paint the motor. So you've got to feel lucky sometimes. And now, I've been cleaning the block up with just a 3M clean and strip disc on a little whizzy sander, And diesel motors are pretty fussy about getting dirt inside them. So at this stage I've still got the manifolds on, but I'm just about to pull the exhaust manifold and turbo off. And as I go and keep things sealed up. So I'll take the elbow out of the bottom of the block here for the turbo oil drain and just put a plug in that. And the same thing with the turbo oil feed there, I'll just blank that off. And then exhaust ports are not that fussy because you just poke some rag in them and you're not going to get too many dramas there. But once I get the intake manifold off, I've got to be a bit more fussy, I would say. So I'll have to tape them up. I'm also going to change the compressor, so that'll come off at this point in time. And there's a few other little things that go into the crankcase I'll take off and seal up. It's still full of oil. I'm not going to take the oil filters off. I'll just paint in around either side of them. So if the paint's a bit ugly behind them, it doesn't really matter much. It's not going to affect anything. Oil filters will hide it. And I want to run it before I change the oil. It's well overdue for an oil change, just looking at what was on the dipstick. But it's right on the full mark. And the story I was given, and it's one of those things, the ad caught my eye, for want of a better thing. He put in there, good running second-hand engine, any test welcome. And I thought, this bloke's pretty confident that this is a nice engine and everyone's going to be happy with it. So that's when I rang him and we had a bit of a talk and I got more excited about it and went from there. So I bought it just on that. So anyway, it looks like we've landed on our feet. But the other really weird thing is someone's put a bit of effort into painting this at some stage. And it's been painted the wrong colour. And if you clean up the spots, it's actually some kind of a metallic-y blue. And it looks like it was done when it was all pretty young. And they've taken everything off to paint it. And like all the pipes and hoses and things like that, it's painted in behind the exhaust manifold. And either it was done at one point on a rebuild and they painted up a sporty colour, so maybe the engine was modified and done then. Or the other possibility is it was done for a truck show. Maybe it was a new truck on a model release or something like that went to a truck show somewhere, and even the manufacturer might have actually done it to make it look a bit more sporty. But don't know, someone might shed some light on it, but I certainly don't know anything about it. But the original engine colour is sort of a light bluey grey. I'll grab that. Okay. So yeah, yesterday I was trying to get a paint sample and I cleaned up this bracket off it and got the top layers off. So that's the colour the engines normally are, and I'm going to paint it back to that colour. And went and saw my paint man in Bunbury yesterday, Brent, and he mixed me up a litre of paint. But we did it the easy way. We just went through the colour chips and found something close. And it's a bit darker than what I've got, what I need. But looking at it, it's got all the right tones in it. So we both agreed all it needed was a bit of white in it. And so I've got plenty of white here. I'll just throw a bit more white in it and stir it up before I go to slop it on. So plan today, finish getting it ready, and I'll hang it up on the crane. I'll drop this cradle off the bottom of it, clean up around the flywheel housing and the bottom of the sump there. And once I'm happy that it's all clean and pretty, we'll have it outside, hanging out in the outdoor booth, and I'll slop a coat of paint over it. So, but they're a big motor when they're sitting on the ground beside you. And I'll just share another little thing that sort of popped into my head as well at the same time. When I was a kid, and I'd sneak out to Powers Mill every time I could to get a lift home with my dad from school, he had a 711 Mack motor he'd rebuilt, and this engine was taller than me. And I thought, this is just the coolest thing I've ever seen. Such a big thing was this old 711 Mack. Well, this would dwarf that a little bit, but not by a lot, but it would a little bit. So anyway, have a quick look at our gearbox as well. Okay. Here's the gearbox, more or less ready to go on. It's just got to have the input shaft put back in it, and I need that to line the clutch up on the motor. But everything's sort of, the rest of it's ready to go. And I've got the slave valve's been rebuilt, put a kit through that. It was a little bit salt affected inside. It would have worked, but I'm glad I actually did it because of some of the passages that had a bit of probably salt-laden air pulled through them, or a little bit of moisture from the air system, so there's a little bit of corrosion on them. I've made a gear stick that should work, and what it is, it's an international stick, and I've cut the bottom of it off. The international bush that fits in here I can't buy anymore, so this is the Eaton gear stick, and I've welded the international one to it, and I've got it, I think, at the right height to make it work. And so the plan is to get the box in the truck and just make sure the gear stick's where I'm comfortable with before we commit ourselves to blasting it and painting it and putting the bush in it and making it happy. But this one here has had a repair on the tower. I might have mentioned this before, but it's had, this is a repair section that you just weld onto a damaged tower, and this tower is a little bit taller than the one I've got in mind, so it's going to take my gear stick from being a bit of a javelin throw back to being a nice close ratio thing. But we'll go out and have a look. It's probably the easiest way. Come for a walk with me. Truck's just outside the door. Here's another thing. This is my bunny barrier that goes around the open part of my shed. I went to a lot of expense to make this many years ago, but the rabbits get into the shed and under the old tractors and trucks and things and cause all sorts of problems. I've done a pretty good job of keeping them out, but the bunny barrier was down for a little while this year, and a rabbit moved into the shed. But he's done a really good job of keeping the grass down. And I've seen him a couple of times. He just disappears back in under all the old junk. But the grass was getting out of hand before he moved in, so I've got to be a little bit grateful about that. Alright, old truck. Alright. That's just my breakfast bowl getting thrown into the bunk. So the gear stick in it now, that's into gear and out of gear. It's not too bad, and I'm sort of used to where it is. I don't want it to be any taller in the cab or shorter in the cab. I quite like it where it is, but if we can tighten up that gate, that'd be nice. If it's too hard, I'll just put this tower back on it and go from there. But the problem we're going to have is this one's got a round the corner shift, so right over and back is your first gear, and then it just runs as a H pattern, so you've got second, third, but fourth gear's around the corner. You pull it back in here and then you push it forward to fifth, and then being a 15 speed but you drive it as a 10 speed high range, you just go back and go through the same pattern again. But the 18 speed has got a bog cog over here for all your pulling it out of the mud and trying to sort of get 3 trailers started on a hill and stupid stuff like that. But you drive it with your 4 stick positions. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I'm going to have to get used to changing my mind from going from this gear to this gear rather from this gear to back here to this gear. So that's going to be interesting. So same deal again, higher range, you flick the button up on the front, which is just in there, and then you repeat the pattern. But also with the 18 is you can split every cog. So this button on the side here is the splitter. So you've got low range, high range, and you would go from, say, if you were in first in, that's low, high range, in low range, yeah, that's high range there. So if you were in high range in first, you'd flick the button, pull it through to second, and you've gone up half a gear, and then your next gear change would just be back into second again as a half a cog up, and then through to third, you've gone up half a gear, and then the same thing, half a cog, and through like that. So that gives you your 18 speeds basically. So yeah, fun and games. So anyway, here's my office. There's my old Inter. And that's another thing with my engine. I had a little bit of drama with some of the wiring sorting out. So being newer technology, I've got to change a lot of the wires to make it all work in this truck. And it's about a 15-year gap from the electronic technology on this engine to the one that's going in it. And a lot of the differences are there's data feeds, which I don't have on this engine. And I'd got everything pretty much sorted out. I'd gone through wiring diagrams and what I already knew, and I'd written out a list of things I had to change, working my way through it, and I had 3 wires left over. And I went through every Detroit wiring diagram I could find. I was downloading PDFs off the internet and going through them, and all they said was data output, had the circuit numbers identified, had the colours of the wires that plug on there from the Detroit wiring diagrams, data output. Anyway, I'm going to bed after pondering on it for about 12 hours in between doing other things, and suddenly, you bloody idiot, data output, the ECM drives the dash gauges, so oil temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, water temperature gauge. So yeah, so that's my data outputs, but that won't work in my truck because mine is very much an analog truck living in a digital world, and I'm just going to leave my mechanical oil pressure gauge on it, my electric temperature gauge standalone, and even the rev counter just runs sensor on the flywheel, and it's not compatible with what's on the engine. Some of it's simplified. Exhaust brake or engine brakes circuits are a bit simpler. The cruise circuits will simplify a bit from there, so that'll work out, and then just all the other gauges will just stay as they are. So there you go, bit of an update on that. We'll talk to you soon.